This video goes out to all the bearded gentlemen out there. This video's sponsor, Manscaped, are rolling out brand new kit to help your upstairs stay as tidy as your downstairs. The new Beard Hedger and Handyman Face Shave are top tier, and you can get them for 20% off when you use offer code SKILLUP. Click the link below to get grooming or stick around to the end of the video to learn more.
Wayfinder. Man, what a tragic story this is. This is a new MMO light from Airship Syndicate, the guys behind Battle Chasers, Darksiders Genesis, and the recent Ruined King game published by Riot. Wayfinder, though, is being published under Digital Extremes, who you may know as the developers of Warframe. Now, I played a couple pre-release builds. The first one I had access to was a boosted account with maxed out gear and all the content unlocked. The other one was a fresh account where I got to experience the early game, that being the open world, the questing, the leveling, and the general gameplay loop. But I had a pretty limited window to play these, which made it rather difficult to gauge things like server stability and the crafting economy, both of which are very core to the experience. So I was keen to jump into the official early access launch to properly test these things in-game. Little did I know just how much of a disaster this launch was gonna be. Enormous queues, upwards of 15,000 players long, and these queues moved slow, with maximum server capacity being just 10,000 players total across all platforms. Even if you waited there for the 5+ hours and got to the front, there was still no guarantee you could play, as network issues would boot you to the back of the queue then and there, or after less than an hour of play time. This was the experience of myself and many others, sitting in queues for hours on end, finally getting in, doing maybe one quest or dungeon, before being kicked out and rejoining the queue. Airship Syndicate released an official apology a day later, with Digital Extremes taking responsibility as the game runs on their server infrastructure. Steam says I have 50 hours clocked. Absolutely not. I had about 15 hours of playtime between the two pre-release builds, and maybe 8 or so hours on the live release, so I'm not exaggerating when I say I've spent more time in queues than I did playing the game. As a result of these issues, the game plummeted to as low as 32% mostly negative on Steam, with the community eventually labeling the game Wayfinder. And that is an accurate name on many levels, not just because of the queues, but because you should absolutely wait to play this game, even though I do like it overall. While the game can get a little stale as a result of an all-too-familiar gameplay loop and unexciting itemization, the characters and combat have solid foundations, and boss design especially shows a lot of promise for the future. Between the bosses, dungeons, open world, and multitude of characters and weapons available at launch, there's also a pretty sizable content offering here for an early access title, provided you're in for the grind. What really carried this experience for me, though, is the art. Airship Syndicate have crafted this gorgeous, stylized world bursting with charm and colorful characters. The main criticism I can see being aimed at Wayfinder is that it's derivative. This game is more or less Warframe, with a high fantasy setting and a focus on melee combat over gunplay. It has a similar monetization model. The full launch will be a free-to-play title with a cash shop that sells characters and weapons, with that familiar loop of farming materials from procedural dungeons to craft them instead if you don't want to spend the cash. The mod system is also near identical, where you're stacking these upgrade components on gear, matching their polarities to reduce their costs and min-max your build. You equip your new stuff, you grind more missions, level everything up, slot in your upgrades, and then you do it all over again. If that doesn't sound fun to you, or you've tried Warframe and totally bounced off that loop, I'm gonna say it right now, Wayfinder is not the game for you. But if that does sound good for you, if you're excited by the promise inherent in another live service, loot grinding MMO light, overseen by one of the leaders in the genre and developed by a proven studio, then it may be worth jumping in on the ground floor. But there's no rush. There's still so many server issues to be resolved, so many game systems that are still a little underbaked, and you should definitely wait until the dust finally settles. First, I want to clear the air. Wayfinder is not an MMORPG. While Airship Syndicate haven't directly advertised it as such, I see this misconception being spread around everywhere. This is as much of an MMORPG as like Destiny is. I'd class it more like an action co-op MMO light, where you'll occasionally cross paths with players out in the world or at the main hub area. But for the most part, you'll only be playing with a couple others at a time in the instanced dungeon content. You also do not create your own character. This is likely an immediate deal breaker for those who embrace that RPG element, but that's just what this game is. You play as pre-made characters that have their own background, skills, traits, and proficiencies. There are ways to make yourself stand out though. You can transmog each individual part of your characters. You can dye them with multiple dye channels, equip extra charms and trinkets. Unfortunately, I never found any cosmetics that were earnable in-game though. Fingers crossed the devs include at least some of these down the line, because it'd be a real shame if the only form of visual progression is through spending cash. There's a total of 6 characters at launch and 17 weapons, with many more on the way. You select one of 3 options initially, but beyond that, you'll need to buy them with real money or craft them. So like Warframe, the core loop revolves around crafting these characters and weapons using your materials earned from activities. So, how long does that take, you might ask? Well, after about 8 hours of casual playtime, not specifically farming any particular material, I've actually almost got everything I need to craft the character Silo, as you can see here. There's a few other components I'll need to find, like these vestiges, but I couldn't find any info in-game on where specifically these come from. Weapons, though, they do have that info. You can go into each recipe, and it'll tell you exactly where each material is sourced. Even though I haven't crafted any so far, you can see here that I'm actually pretty close. There's just a couple bosses I need to unlock to farm those remaining materials. Unlike Warframe, there's no craft time associated with this stuff. If you've got the materials, you can craft them instantly. No setting an alarm at 1 AM so you can get up and try your new toy. Overall, the time frame to craft these characters and weapons seems fairly reasonable so far. It's all within reach for the average player, and I can imagine the amount of materials you yield increases as you level up and become more efficient at farming the game's activities. The characters themselves have quite varied kits. Senja, for example, her abilities revolve around using her massive gauntlet to taunt and pummel enemies, but holding down the ability will follow up with a showboat, where she'll emote in place while taking reduced damage, charging this gauge at the bottom that significantly increases her outgoing damage. Venomess, on the other hand, is a sort of support/assassin. She releases poison clouds that deal damage over time, but also heal allies. She can follow this up with a bomb that sucks up all the clouds and then detonates for massive damage and healing based on the amount of poison consumed. The other half of your kit, though, is your weapon. Characters can equip any weapon type, ranging from double daggers to rail guns. Each of these have a unique mechanic and special ability as well. For example, this chainsaw sword and shield that builds up a gauge from heavy attacks, which can then be spent on a shield throw to blitz through targets. Combat itself feels pretty decent as well. It's an action game, so you have light and heavy attacks. Ranged weapons have this active reload thing, and enemies telegraph their attacks for you to block, parry, or dodge out of. So there's quite a distinct number of playstyles to mix and match, which is great for keeping things fresh, but I do have some grievances. Number one, there's a whole lot of animation lock going on here that just doesn't feel great at all. It's okay during melee because you're more or less stuck in place when you're attacking anyway, but it feels not so great on those like ranged characters, as you can shoot while you're moving around, but then get rooted in place just to like lob a bomb. There's quite long after casts as well, that being the time between when you cast one skill and then another. So using abilities in quick succession feels a bit clunky, especially on the faster paced characters. Number two, while all characters can equip all weapons, they seem designed with a specific weapon type in mind, which causes an otherwise flexible system to feel quite rigid. Wingrave, for example, is this paladin-like character who heals himself and allies through melee kills pistols, and his abilities are also mostly close range attacks. So in this case, you're also mostly close range attacks. So in this case, you're probably gimping yourself a little by using a gun on this guy. In fact, I kind of struggled to find any reason at all to equip any of the melee-oriented characters with ranged weapons and vice versa. Were there some way to actually modify the function of your abilities instead of the linear upgrades that we've got now, or even perhaps allowing two weapons to swap between, I think you'd be able to better leverage that weapon system. Airship Syndicate, though, have said that they're looking at adding some sort of skill tree or system for slotting in different abilities outside of the four that you're stuck with, but we don't know what this entails, so it remains to be seen if that pans out. A lot of the build craft happens through these echoes, which you earn from enemies. You slot these upgrades into your characters and gear. Every slot has its own polarity, and matching that with an echo's polarity will reduce the energy cost by half, allowing you to fit more in. Again, if you've played Warframe, you will be well acquainted with this mod system, but I've got to say its implementation here is a little underbaked at the moment. You see, in Warframe, mods have these clearly communicated benefits like 5% increased attack speed, which can be upgraded to up to 30% and beyond, and stacked with other mods and frames for ridiculous results. In Wayfinder, you will get an echo that just says plus 167 weapon power. What the hell does that mean? I don't know. There's no way to see what that translates to as a percentage. There's a stat called ability power. I know it's technically boosting my abilities, I guess, but like how much? I assume it boosts their damage, but what about the non-damage abilities? Does it boost my weapon ability too, or does that scale with the weapon power stat? Most of these echoes are these boring stat sticks. The accessories that you can equip also have these stats. There's a sort of set bonus associated with them, but they're also just uninteresting flat percent increases at the moment. But the boss echoes have more interesting perks thematic to that boss, like this one that I got from the Beastmaster, where landing a critical strike would summon one of 3 beasts for a special effect. That's a rather cool premise, you know, harvesting your enemy's own powers to use against them, and I hope this is something that gets expanded on to all echoes in some capacity. In a game where farming these items on repeat to min-max your build is the core conceit of the gameplay loop, the upgrades using such nebulous terms and not changing your playstyle in any way makes buildcraft feel like the weakest part of the package, in my opinion, in a game that will already struggle to justify its existence. Right now, it's got Warframe's mod system, but like none of the power fantasy. You're not stacking attack speed into the extremes, you're not blasting through rooms in seconds, and that's great for those looking for something new. But if they're not going to go down that route, then I think Airship need to work on carving out that unique identity for the game through these set bonuses, synergies between the character kits and weapons, and just more ways to meaningfully tailor your build through these echoes. So, where will you be looting and leveling? Well, through questing in the open world and plundering dungeons, of course. But before we dive into those, I want to briefly talk about the art. What a beautiful world Airship Syndicate have crafted here. It's no surprise at all why this studio was chosen to develop Riot's Ruined King game, which I played, by the way, and thoroughly enjoyed, because these guys make art that looks more Riot than Riot does. In fact, this is exactly how I picture Riot's MMO to look. These environments are dense with detail. Every rock, every brick, every roof tile, it's all got that signature cartoony chisel that's just so clean, I love it. Parts of this game just looks like you're running around a piece of concept art. It reminds me a lot of WildStar, actually, especially in the main hub's vibrant neon-soaked underbelly. Rest in peace, WildStar. Maybe some of you are tired of this same look between Fortnite, Dauntless, Spellbreak, WoW, and like every Riot game ever, but I've always had a weakness for this sort of stylized direction, and man, have Airship Syndicate really raised the bar here with Wayfinder. Performance is iffy though. I was actually not playing on Ultra most of the time. I had to drop it down to high just to consistently stay above 60 FPS, and I was on a pretty decent PC with an RTX 3080 and i7. Even then, I'd get the occasional stutter during combat. Again, this is early access. You should certainly expect a fair bit of jank overall. On many occasions, enemies would just pop in from out of nowhere. There were floating enemies, bugged animations, and the camera will often clip through objects, obscuring your vision. Nothing that really prohibited me from playing, but enough to pull me out of the experience and remind me that, yep, this is definitely an early access title. Sometimes you'll just click things, but the game won't respond. UI elements just disappear on you. And speaking of the UI, it's not great. It's all huge, in your face, no doubt designed for console in mind. Speaking of controller though, I did play a couple hours of this on the Steam Deck, and it actually feels decent there. On medium settings, it ran an average 45 FPS. Admittedly, that was wildly inconsistent, but your tolerance for those sort of FPS fluctuations may vary. And for me, playing a game that looks like this on a 7-inch screen, I didn't mind it at all. And I actually intend on keeping it installed on the Steam Deck, because of course there's no better place to grind than in the bedroom. To the game's credit, I think the onboarding experience here is quite well executed. Jumping into any MMO-style game can often be immediately overwhelming with all its activities, currencies, vendors, and flashing icons thrown at you. But Wayfinder takes things slow. It'll introduce you to each of the game's elements one by one, leaving enough breathing room between them to let you digest it all. And I had no problem navigating the game's systems and menus once the tutorials were complete. This is also accompanied by some fantastic voice acting. Not all the dialogue has voice work yet, but I really enjoyed the parts that did.
A new Wayfinder. Delightful, delightful. I'm Bench, and you need what I have, for I have what you need. Whatever that may be. A potion, a poem, what is it now?
At a certain point in the story, you'll set out into the game's first open world zone, known as the Highlands. There's a second open world zone set in the snow, but it's far less developed at the moment, so I wouldn't really include it here. I thought the level design here was great. While it looks small at first, it's quite densely packed with landmarks and buildings, plenty of back alleys and hidden caves to explore for materials. Enemies do not scale with your level though, so be sure to tread carefully. You'll come across all manner of multi-chained side quests, random activities, and treasure chests. It's nothing standout, though I did enjoy this world boss that had about a dozen of us taking down this giant flaming golem. Absolutely kicked our asses, but the camaraderie here was awesome, and it was just refreshing to fight alongside so many other players. Eventually, you'll be asked to look for your first dungeon, known here as Lost Zones, and once you've discovered them, you'll be able to access them directly via the big portal in the main city. These are procedurally generated layouts that you'll run through, kill some stuff, fight the boss at the end, and then leave with your loot. Overall, it's more methodical than something like Warframe. Don't expect to be careening down these hallways, ignoring everything. In fact, the pacing of the combat felt akin to, like a traditional MMORPG dungeon where you'll take on each room at a time, especially because you're incentivized to clear as many random events and mobs as you can to maximize your final rewards. Those events range from killing waves of enemies in a time limit, or lining up these floating spheres so you can open up a gate. After enough playtime, you will of course come to recognize the same tile sets and enemies, and it may start to get a little monotonous. So how do we spice things up? Well, you can up the difficulty of the dungeon, but there's also these mutators that you can plug in and combine to further bump up the challenge and rewards. There was one where bombs were constantly being thrown at me, one where there's gold everywhere that you can collect, but the more you collect, the more damage you take. There was one where enemies would double in size at low health and explode on death. To be honest, these are a mixed bag. While the ones I mentioned are fun and easy to play around, some just aren't. There's one that causes enemies to inflict burning during these heat waves. There's one where enemies poison you, but as far as I can tell, there's no way to cleanse these effects. You just pray to God that you can out-heal them. I enjoy being able to tailor my experience and challenge myself without just increasing enemy health and damage, but this system does need a little more work to allow for more counterplay. You'll also eventually unlock individual bosses in these biomes that you'll go on separate hunts for. These provide the more lucrative items and materials. It'll take you a while to unlock all of this, mind you. Like, in my 8 or so hours with the game, I only unlocked about half the content available here. Like I said though, I was able to get a full picture of the content offering through a boosted account. So there are 9 dungeons across 3 different locations, and I counted 11 boss hunts in total. There's no pinnacle activity or something waiting at the end though. You just farm the same dungeons and bosses you've unlocked along the way, but I suspect it'll take you about 20 to 30 hours to unlock all this stuff, which is honestly a sizable amount of content for an early access title, I think. So I took this opportunity to try out all the bosses, and you know what? They're pretty good. It's very reactive boss design. They move all over the arena, have multiple telegraphed abilities. Sometimes there'll be a few waves of weaker mobs to clear in between phases, or some unique overlapping mechanics that demand more spatial awareness. As a melee character, I could actively block most of these attacks, but it would drain my stamina, and the harder hitting abilities would chunk down your break meter, meaning that tanking too many of these would completely stun you for a period. You'll need to pay close attention to telegraphs and animations, figuring out which ones to block versus dodge, and finding those breaks between mechanics to either heal up with your flasks or unload your abilities. There's a fair number of elements to contend with here, which certainly kept me on my toes, especially during solo play. My only gripe here is the arenas. You know, they're mostly just these flat, static rooms. I think given that you're able to sprint, double jump, and air dash, there's certainly room here for more creative arena design across the board to leverage that freedom of movement. You do get the sense that Airship Syndicate have bigger plans for these though. There was one boss in particular that I was quite impressed with. This one had a full-on stage transition midway through the fight onto these platforms that would phase in and out, so you'd have to remember where you're able to stand. This became all the more important when these big blocks started moving in that would absolutely wreck you on contact. So you needed to do a sort of dance between these platforms to dodge them. But yeah, there was such a clear disparity between this fight and the others. So I really hope the devs plan to implement a similar level of mechanical depth in future content. It's recommended that you matchmake with other players for these bosses, but they're all currently designed to be soloable, and they do appear to scale based on the number of players. That said, Airship Syndicate have said that proper raid-like encounters designed around larger groups are in the pipeline, which is a very exciting prospect. So the general loop here is essentially unlocking these dungeons and bosses until you hit one that's too difficult. Then you do some side quests or farm dungeons for XP and materials to boost your power level. You kill the boss and unlock their next difficulty. You farm materials to boost your power level. Kill the boss at the next difficulty. Repeat. You'll do this for the allure of higher level echoes, experiencing all the content, and of course, more materials for crafting. It is a very standard, albeit outdated, vertical progression model. Often, this can feel like a needless treadmill, one that resets all over again with every new season or content release. And currently, a lot of games seem to be moving away from this, as players seem to demand a bit more nuance to their progression. This, combined with the rigid character kits and loot that doesn't evolve your playstyle in any way, will likely result in a lot of players falling off. But if Airship Syndicate can keep pace with player power by building on the mutator system, the boss design, and just maintain a steady content release cadence, they should be able to keep the endgame interesting and amass a player base willing to commit for the long haul. So thankfully, there's a lot more planned for Wayfinder's future than just an endless loot grind. In fact, the early access is launching with player housing. That's right, you can furnish your own cozy apartment through crafting or buying items from vendors. I imagine this will also be one of the main money makers in the cash shop as well. But it's not just about looks. You'll also apparently earn these artifacts that you can place in your home for special buffs. I'm not sure exactly what that entails though, as I didn't find any during my time with the game. I didn't get to experiment with this a lot, but the systems are there and will certainly be expanded upon. Airship Syndicate have said that they'd eventually like guild houses and complete neighborhoods, which is quite ambitious to promise this early in the game's life cycle, but I can appreciate their confidence. Like Warframe, there's a cash shop that sells skins and stuff, but it also sells characters and weapons directly if you want to bypass the crafting system, and they are not cheap. Each character will run you about $15 to $20, weapons being a little bit less. They do that annoying thing where the premium currency bundles give you just too little to buy anything, so you need to get the tier up or purchase a couple bundles together. Though Airship have said that they'll be addressing this and bringing the weapon costs down, so that isn't necessary. I think the biggest difference between this and Warframe though is that you cannot trade the premium currency. So there's no free alternative to earn that currency or buy items in the store, which is a real shame. There's also the B word. That's right, it's another battle pass. However, this one works a little differently. Your XP unlocks keys that you can use to unlock nodes on this board for rewards. You can plot out which rewards you want, which ones you'd like to ignore. Free players get access to 25 keys, whereas paying for the pass gets you 100. Worth noting as well that if you purchase this during the time it's available, you will keep the battle pass forever. It doesn't expire, you can go back and progress it whenever you like. Out of all the monetization going on here, this is the one that I took the least issue with. I appreciated having some agency here, and given this will be a free-to-play title, I find myself more forgiving of this model. Because yeah, this game will be launching as a free-to-play title on PC and PlayStation with cross-save and cross-play enabled. The full 1.0 release is expected to be roughly 6 months away, according to the devs, but picking up the $20 Founders Pack will grant you entry to the early access, which is now live. That said, you should absolutely hold off on that purchase for now. Despite this review being rather positive overall, this frustrating launch week and ongoing server issues undoubtedly shook my confidence. The lack of foresight from Airship Syndicate and Digital Extremes was very disappointing to see. I mean, a 10,000 player cap for an MMO? How does that happen? The devs have worked tirelessly to recover from this catastrophic launch, successfully increasing server stability and capacity day by day, and while the game is in a playable state now, there's still work to be done here on both the network and system side before I can comfortably recommend this. With the early access model, Airship Syndicate hope to work collaboratively with players to ensure Wayfinder realizes its full potential, and they've got the guidance of a studio best known for that, Digital Extremes. They've already implemented a lot of the feedback from the beta tests and the early access launch, disastrous as it was, so I find myself feeling cautiously optimistic. If Airship Syndicate can keep that line of communication open, use the feedback afforded to them to build upon the game's solid foundations, I think it's got a fair shot at eventually finding success in the same way Warframe did. I, for one, am keen to see what the future holds for Wayfinder, and will be keeping a close eye on Airship Syndicate as they embark on the long road ahead.
Alright, at this point you probably already know this video's sponsor, Manscaped, and you might be like, my balls are already shaved, thank you very much. But did you know that hair also grows on your face? It's true, at least for some people. I couldn't grow a beard to save my life personally. Point is, whether you choose to rock a shock of thick bearded growth or you like to keep it clean and smooth like yours truly, Manscaped has you covered with their all-new Beard Hedger and Handyman electric shaver. The Beard Hedger is exactly what you'd expect. It's an electric trimmer that allows you to finesse your beard, allowing you to achieve whatever style you're going for. Short or long, scruffy or tidy, it doesn't matter. You can quickly and easily adjust the settings on the Beard Hedger, allowing you to maintain or style your manly mane like never before. But that product is not for me because, like I said, I cannot grow anything beyond annoying stubble. What I am very, very interested in is Manscaped's all-new Handyman electric shaver. This thing is tailor-made for me since it allows me to quickly and easily tidy up any stubble when I'm about to head out the door, which does happen. I do go outside from time to time. I also do a fair amount of travel, and this thing is going to be great for that. Just pop it into my toiletries bag, and I can leave my razor, my shaving cream, and all the other treatments back at home. Best of all, both the Beard Hedger and the Handyman are rechargeable, waterproof, and super easy to clean and maintain. Convenience and reliability are key to everything that Manscaped make, and these products are no different. So if you want to sculpt your beard with the Beard Hedger or level up your away game with the Handyman, head straight over to manscaped.com and use offer code SKILLUP to get 20% off and free shipping. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com using offer code SKILLUP. Manscaped, shave your balls. And your face, I guess. God bless you, Manscaped. Thank you for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.